Alright, hey guys, welcome back to our Chapter 6 notes. We are on to the final section of Chapter 6. So in this section we're talking about systems of inequalities. So now we're taking what we know about systems of equations and we're going to tie it in with all of that information that we learned in Chapter 5 about inequalities. And we're only talking about graphing. We're not going to go beyond graphing. So really, most of this section is information that we already know. It's just kind of putting it all together into one and seeing how we can apply what we already know. So let's go over just some reminders about graphing and then also inequalities. So like I said, systems of inequalities, we're just talking about graphing. So we're graphing two of our inequality equations on the same graph. So let's do a quick refresher on how we graph in general. Remember that our equation has to look like y equals mx plus b. Ours won't have an equal sign though, it'll have an inequality symbol. So that's either going to be r greater than or equal to, less than, or less than or equal to, and for that equal sign. But we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about the inequalities. So remember what all of these things stand for. M is our slope. We want to take that m and we want to make it into a rise over run so that we can build our points. B is how we're going to get our y-intercept. And remember that our y-intercept is where we want to start. That's the first point we want to put on our graph, and that's going to look, our y-intercept, we're going to set it up as 0, comma, b. And that's the first point that goes on our graph, and then we build the rest of our points with our rise over run. So that's just a little graphing refresher. Let's go and do a little refresher about our inequalities, stuff that we know about inequalities. Now, because we're working with the big graph and not the number line graph, we're not going to be talking about open circle or closed circle, but that's going to help us to figure out what kind of line we have to draw with. So if we have an equation or an inequality here that would regularly have an open circle in our number line graph, so that would be if we have just greater than or less than. That means when we draw our line on the graph, when we connect all of our points, it's going to be a dashed line. So it's going to be not connected. It'll be something like that. But if we were talking about the number line graph and we had a closed circle, so that's if we have greater than or equal to or less than or equal to. Remember, it's got to have that equal to for it to be a closed circle. That means we would have a solid line. So the whole thing's connected between our points. And then the final step that I know we struggled with a little bit is we have to test 0, 0 to figure out where we need to shade. Remember, we're talking about inequalities, so one side of our graph has to be shaded. And in these cases, because we have two inequalities, we're going to have a place where that shading overlaps. So let's look at some examples to hopefully help you guys out a little bit. So I'm going to work up here, and I'm going to try to keep it color coordinated to help you guys out. So the top equation, or my equation number 1, is going to be in pink, and my bottom equation, equation number 2, is going to be in green. So first one here, we've got y is greater than x minus 2, and y is less than or equal to x. So let's start with one equation at a time. I'm going to take my top equation here and I'm going to do all my work for it over here on the left side. So y is greater than x minus 2. We want to first figure out what m and b are. So our slope for our rise over run, and then b for our y-intercept. Remember that m is always the number right in front of x, but in this case we don't have a number in front of x, so that means we have an automatic 1. And we want to make that into a fraction, so the way we make a whole number into a fraction is to just put it over 1. So our rise is positive 1, and our run is also positive 1. So then we want to move on to our b value. The only other number we have left here is negative 2. So that means our y-intercept is going to be at 0, negative 2. So let's not move on to the bottom equation yet. Let's focus on just graphing this inequality. So we are starting with our y-intercept at 0, -2. So 0 tells me I don't move left or right on my graph, but -2 tells me that I go down 2. And there's my y-intercept on that graph. And now I want to build with my rise over run. So we're going to rise 1, we go up 1, and we want to run 1. So we go to the right 1. And there's my next point. And then again, up 1 and to the right 1 from there. And then we continue building off of our points. So up 1 and to the right 1. Up 1 and to the right 1. And I'm going to keep doing that because I want to make sure that I fill out my whole graph since I'm going to have to shade. So before we go and we draw our line through these points, we need to figure out, is it solid or is it dashed? Well, that comes from our inequality symbol. Would this be an open circle or a closed circle? In this case, this would be an open circle because we don't have an equal to underneath it. So that means this is going to be a dashed line. So I'm going to dash through my points here. And before we graph the other one, let's do our test as well. So we're going to test 0, 0. So I take my equation, y is greater than x minus 2, and I want to substitute 0 in for x and 0 in for y. So 0 is greater than 0 minus 2, and now we want to evaluate this right side here. 0 minus 2 is -2. So now we need to say this statement out loud. 0 is greater than -2. We want to figure out if this is true or false. 0 is larger than -2, so this is true. So that means we want to find 0, 0. 0, 0 produces a true statement, so that's the side that we're going to shade on. So I'm going to shade that right now. So that's everything where 0, 0 is with our graph. So now let's move on to our bottom equation here. I'm going to do all of that work on this side. So y is less than or equal to x. So we want to start with m and b. M, remember, is always the number right in front of x. So in this case, again, there's nothing written in front of here, so that's a 1. We need to make that into a fraction. So we're going to pick 1 over 1. So we've got our rise over run, same as the last one. And then our b value, we don't have any b value. If it doesn't exist, that just means it's 0. So our y-intercept is going to be at 0, 0. So let's go ahead and start graphing. So we're going to start with 0, 0. And then our rise over run is the same as the last one. So we're going to go up 1 and to the right 1. Up 1 and to the right 1. Up 1 and to the right 1, or the opposite, down 1 and to the left 1. And we want to do that all the way across our graph. And now before we connect our dots here, we need to figure out, is it going to be a solid or a dashed line? And that comes from our inequality symbol here. This is a less than or equal to. We have that equal to, so that means this is going to be a solid line. So I'm going to draw a solid line through my points here. Now our test here is a little bit different. Normally we would test 0, 0, right? But 0, 0 falls on this line. So we know 0, 0 is going to work because it's a point on our line. So that means we have to test a point that is not on our line. So let's make this as simple as possible. Instead of 0, 0, let's just move 1 point over. That point isn't on our line, and it's one that we can test. So that point over here, that means we moved 1 to the right, so 1, comma, we didn't move up or down, so that's 0. Again, you only have to test a different point if 0, 0 falls on your line. Most of the time, 0, 0 isn't going to be on your line. But this one is a different case. So we want to bring down our equation here. Y is less than or equal to x. And we want to substitute in. So in this case, 1 is x, 0 is y. So 0 is less than or equal to 1. And then we want to figure out, is this true or false? Well, yeah, 0 is less than 1, so that's true. So that means where that point is, 1, 0, that's the side of our graph that we want to shade. So we're going to color in on this side. But we are mostly concerned with this middle part in between here because that's where our graph's shading overlap. We are worried about this middle piece right here. We're really only worried about where they overlap. So for this case, I showed all this extra space, but when it comes down to it, you're not going to want to shade all this extra pieces. But again, we'll get to that. Let's look at that maybe in the next one. So let's move down here. I'm going to do the next one on this number 4 graph here. So y is greater than or equal to x plus 2, and y is greater than 2x plus 3. So again, my top equation is going to be in pink, and my bottom equation is going to be in green. So let's just work with my top equation here for right now. So this is equation 1. Oops. And then equation 2. So equation number 1, y is greater than or equal to x plus 2. Let's start off here. Let's figure out if it's going to be dashed or solid. That way we don't have to go back and worry about it. That comes from our inequality symbol, greater than or equal to. We've got that equal to, so we know that it's going to be a solid line. Now let's figure out what m and b are. M, our number in front of x, just like the last two. There is no number in front of x, so it's a 1, and we need to make it a fraction, so we make it 1 over 1. Our rise over run. And then our y-intercept comes from our b value, which is a positive 2 here. So our y-intercept is going to be 0, 2. So let's go ahead and graph that. 0, 2 is going to be at positive 2 on my y-axis. And then just like the last two that we did, we would go up 1 to the right 1, up 1 to the right 1, or down 1 and to the left 1, all the way across your graph. And we know it's a solid line, so we're going to solid line through all of those points. And then let's do our test. We can use 0, 0, that's not a problem. So y is greater than or equal to x plus 2. We substitute in 0 is greater than or equal to 0 plus 2. We need to evaluate that 0 plus 2, which is a positive 2. So now we need to say this out loud. 0 is greater than or equal to 2. Is 0 greater than or equal to 2? Well, no. 0 is not bigger than 2, and it's not equal to it. So this is false. So I find 0, 0 on my graph, and I know that I'm going to have to, for my pink line, I have to draw on the opposite side. I'm going to have to color in this side, but I'm not going to do that just yet. We're going to save that. I'm going to put a little star up in the top left here to show that that's the side I'm going to color in on. I'm going to shade in on when we get there. But let's go to our second equation here before we do that. Get some room down here. So my second equation, y is greater than 2x plus 3. Again, let's figure out if it's solid or dashed right away. This one is greater than, there's no equal to, so that means it's going to be dashed. Let's pick out our m and our b. M, the number right in front of x. In this case, that's 2. Something other than 1. But we still need to make it into a fraction. So again, we take our whole numbers and we put them over 1 to make it into a fraction. So now 2 is our rise and 1 is our run. And then our y-intercept comes from our b value, so that's going to be 0, positive 3, because we've got plus 3. So let's go back and let's do some graphing. So we start at our y-intercept 0, 3, which is at positive 3 on our y-axis. And now we need to rise to positive, so we're going up, and run 1. It's positive, so we go to the right. And then from there, we're going to go up 2 and to the right 1 again. We've run out of space here on our graph, so now we need to go the opposite way. So we're going to go down 2 and to the left 1, down 2 and to the left 1, and keep going across your whole graph for these ones. And then we've got a dashed line in between here. So now let's do our test. Again, 0, 0 doesn't fall on here, so we know that that works. Or we know that we can use that, I should say, rather. So we're going to take y is greater than 2x plus 3, and we're going to substitute in. Be careful here. Y is going to be 0, is greater than 2 and x are being multiplied here, so be careful when you substitute that 0, and it's got to be 2 times 0. We want to take 2 times 0 first, which is 0, and then 0 plus 3, which is 3. So now we ask ourselves, 0 is greater than 3. Is that true or false? Is 0 greater than 3? No, 0 is not bigger than 3, so that's false. So I'm going to use a different color here. So that means, use blue. So we find 0, 0 in relation to our green line here. It doesn't work, so that means we need to shade on this side of the green line. So also on this side. But it's got to meet the criteria of the green line and the pink line. So we're only going to shade above the pink and the green line. So that's the common shade. And then we're done. I'm not going to shade with the pink and the green. I'm just shading where it works for both of them. So that's going to be it for today's video. These are actually 1 and 2 on your practice sheet. So your job, let me flip this over. So 1 and 2 are done. You need to finish up 3 through 6. Complete 3 through 6 on your own, I should say. For today's assignment. As always, if you have questions, email me, shoot me a message on Google Classroom. I'll answer as fast as I can. It's going to be a little bumpy at first, and that's okay. We've got 2 more lessons to practice this, so I promise it'll get better. As always, stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you guys in the next video.